Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Weatherly with Prince William Economic Development. The NOVA Economic Development Alliance welcomes our guests and our panelists today in the 10th webinar in our 12-part series Beyond COVID-19. Today's webinar is on growth funding. Before 2020, many CEOs forecasted slowing growth and a possible economic recession in the coming year. COVID greatly accelerated that reality, causing massive social, health, and financial turmoil. Many companies have been forced to scrap their plans and focus on the health and safety of their staff, operations, and serving current clients under really difficult circumstances. Today's guests will discuss options for your business. Is this the right time to seek new investment opportunities, to sell, to consolidate? Do I double down on investing in technology or my staff? Or should I just hunker down and wait out the rough ride? Today's panelists, Roy Morris, Sharon Heaton, and Jim Gaiani, will discuss your options. Thank you for attending today's webinar. We appreciate your time. And here's John Jacobs.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, everyone. And speaking of doubling down on technology, I could take a lesson from that because I had a bit of a snafu just moments ago. So I'm now speaking to you from my cell phone. So hopefully you all can hear me and see me fairly well. And I guess that's what we get, when we're doing things live. So that was Michelle Weatherly you heard from. She's with the Department of Economic Development of Prince William County in Virginia. So what I'll do is I'll take you through a bit of an update. And unfortunately, you won't be able to see the update, but I'll speak to it. And we do this every webinar in any case. So if you've been on these webinars before, you'll be familiar with some of these statistics. We have just launched the poll moments ago. Michelle helped me with that. Thank you, Michelle. Yes. And there are 5 very simple questions, very short questions. We would ask you to please look at those and answer those questions as you go through as soon as you can, because we're going to use your poll result and we're going to address those results in our Q&A. And lastly, there is at the bottom nav of your computer, both the poll button and the Q&A button. Please feel free to submit Q&A and certainly the poll results as well. As Michelle said, we have a great panel today. Sharon Heaton, Roy Morris, and Jim Giannani. I'm going to go ahead and just introduce those folks in a moment. Let me take you through the quick update. As you know, the PPP loan program closed on 7/31, yet has about $128 billion remaining in that fund. The EIDL loans, which are the Economic Injury Disaster Loans, also through the SPA, remain available. The difference with those loans is they are not forgivable loans. They cannot be converted to a grant. For the PPP loans that are convertible to a grant, we still have that great website from the Association of the CPAs, pppforgivenesstool.com, that is out there and helps you with your paperwork and making the request to convert to a grant. Unemployment filings for the week ending 8/15 are up slightly to 1.1 million, according to the Labor Department. The employment rate, as you know, dropped in June to 11.1, and so far in July stands around 10.2, so a slight continued reduction on the unemployment rate. The $600 per week unemployment supplement ended at the end of July as well, so it's actually been 4 weeks since that last payment has been received. Congress will be back in full session on the 8th of September. We know that Q2 had a significant drop or contraction by 32.9%. Forecasts remain between 21 and 25% growth in the third quarter. And again, 25% is the other folks in the Federal Reserve of Atlanta. That's our typical source for that information. Total coronavirus or COVID cases as of this morning, according to Johns Hopkins University, worldwide, it's 22.5 million, which is an increase of 3.7 million. In the United States, cases are up to now 5.5 million, an increase of 700,000. And U.S. deaths are currently 173,204, or almost 15,000 increase over the last 2 weeks. The next 2 bullet points are germane to this conversation to a certain degree. And growth funding, and that's a rather broad statement as to what the definition of that is. meaning the sources of funding and the arrangements involved. But just two quick data points. Private equity exits, that is when private equity sells off a piece of their portfolio, decreased 50% in value during the first half of this year as compared to the first half of 19. Obviously not a surprise given the economic downturn and the impact of COVID-19. This does almost by definition means to longer holds by private equity. Yet private equity increased, they raised rose to $348 billion in value in the first half, which is only a 10% decrease over the same period in 2019. So the private equity segment's getting larger, but still they're reacting to what has occurred in the first half of the year due to COVID-19. Let me now introduce, and you can see the folks, oddly I can't see my own panel, but hello panel. Let me introduce the panelists for today. Sharon Heaton is CEO of SB Liftoff, based in Herndon, Virginia, and has advised on transactions totaling more than $12 billion in deal value. SB Liftoff serves the lower and mid-market with the highest level of professionalism, with a focus particularly on government contracting businesses. Prior to founding SB Liftoff, Sharon served as general counsel of the Senate Committee on Environment and Public Works. Sharon was also a co-founder of Welford Energy, an investment bank, providing services to clean energy and low carbon companies. Previously, Sharon served as deputy general counsel of Columbia Energy Group, a Fortune 500 company. Roy Morris is a partner with Dunlap, Bennett, and Ludwig, with offices across the US and internationally. Roy supports entrepreneurs and emerging companies in all stages of business formation, financing, growth, and eventual merger or sale. He serves as outside general counsel and as a trusted sounding board for all types of business decisions with legal implications. Since 1999, Roy's been an enthusiastic sponsor and resource for the Entrepreneurs Organization DC. It's a peer-to-peer learning and support group for entrepreneurs in the Metro DC area. Jim Giannani is president of Veritas Solutions, and he's based in Alexandria, Virginia. He has more than 30 years of operational and client engagement experience, spanning all phases of a company's life cycle. He successfully managed 2 startups from inception through acquisition. As founder and president of Veritas, Jim applies the lessons learned from transforming and growing companies of his own, as well as leading strategic initiatives for Fortune 100 clients. So welcome panelists. Thank you for understanding my technological challenges this afternoon. Apologies for that. Let me, if I could, this is going to be a sort of a rangy conversation, but I'm trying to create some structure here and ask Sharon the first question. So COVID-19 has had a profound impact on many businesses. Some have performed better during the crisis, actually, and others have been horrifically impacted. And yet there is a whole group that have felt almost no impact. Can you speak to why this is? And also for companies that are actually doing well during COVID, what sort of opportunities might be out there for them in the near term?
Absolutely. John, I want to thank you and the panelists for taking the time to do this event, and hope that folks in the audience get some benefit from it. Going to where you just spoke, some companies performed extremely well during the COVID and others less so. And in some ways, it has less to do with performance than the industry that you're in. You could perform as well as you wanted, but if you were a nail salon, there was really only a limited amount of the stuff that you could do in March, April, and May. So I view that less as a performance than kind of the industry segment in which you're focusing on. And you've made a very important point here, which is that while we all understand that COVID has been a disaster, it has had a very disparate impact on different companies. Clearly, if you're a restaurant or a nail salon or in the consumer end of the business, there can be some really some very significant downside. If you are, let's say, in GovCon has largely been unaffected by COVID because they're continuing to provide services and goods to the government, and the government's continuing to pay. And then there are some companies that have done extraordinarily well during this time period. It goes without saying that Zoom is one of them, but there are some surprises out there as well. We're seeing that Home Depot did very well. Well, people were sitting at home and saying, it's time for me to fix the closet. And they would go to Home Depot with their masks on and buy lots of stuff and do it. And Home Depot and Amazon and other companies have done well. So I think that we need to stop looking at COVID as what was the effect on the economy and start looking at what was the effect on different sectors in the economy. Now, having said that, not all companies had the same impact even within the same segment. And those, to me, what I saw is that companies that were prepared for a downturn, and whether that downturn was from COVID or from a change in the economy or consumer tastes, whatever it might be, those companies that were well capitalized with a strong management team, without a lot of excess costs, I think were able to kind of stabilize. Companies that had a lot of debt, I think were in much more difficult situations than those that had more equity involved. So again, it goes very much not only by the sector of the specific business, but also the type of how they've capitalized and prepared their company. Were they pulling all capital out of the company as soon as it was earned, or were there some resources in the company to get them through those hard times?
You speak of the government contractors, and I can understand they've got long-term contracts, and perhaps most of their staff are working remotely to begin with. But does that make them immune? Does that make them immune, or other companies that have not been directly or impacted? Are they immune from the COVID crisis, or are there implications in any case?
I think that there are implications in any place. GovCon right now is a terrific place to be. In January of 2019, when the government had a 35-day historically long government shutdown, government contracting was not necessarily the place to be. So I don't think that you can make a determination that says this is a good sector, this is a bad sector. I think different things that happen affect people differently. One of the things that I find very interesting as I'm talking to potential buyers is that not only are they looking to see whether or not COVID has had a negative impact, they're actually seeing whether or not COVID has had a positive impact. And the question on that positive impact is that a blip on the screen? When COVID goes away, they'll go back to their normal run rate? Or is this going to be something that's long-term sustainable? When I'm an M&A advisor, so I work with people on helping them sell their companies. And it has often surprised me how many buyers come in, and it's in 2019, 2020, and say, I want to see the company's financials for 2008 and 9 and 10. They want to see what happened when the economy tanked back then, and how did this company deal with that? I think we're going to see a similar kind of underwriting concern as it relates to COVID. We'll get past this, and hopefully things will return to whatever the new normal is. But I would expect when I'm doing deals in 2022 and 2025, people are going to be asking for financials from 2020 to basically say, what impact did the COVID have on you? And I'm certainly hearing from buyers, PE particular, that they're now adding global pandemics as one of their underwriting criteria, truthfully, something that they've never really thought about 8 months ago.
Yeah, I read an article at toward the beginning of the year about, actually the beginning of this crisis, so let's call it March, about valuations of companies, and that a lot of is reassessing valuations from the private equity firms, and yet they cannot necessarily do due diligence and go out into the field, kick the tires and really have those face-to-face meetings. Has that been an impact, and perhaps also related to the slowdown of divesting some of their portfolio?
I think that the M&A slowdown in March, April, May was basically everybody saying, hands off the wheel, we don't know what's going on, we're not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. M&A is definitely picking up since June. And people are beginning to pick through the wreckage and saying who's been impacted, who's been positively, who's been negatively, who's not been impacted. So the GovCon market in March, as the world was shutting down, we actually closed a fairly significant size transaction in the GovCon market that wasn't really impacted. Mm-hmm. So I think that there's been a lot of change about that. They talk about M&A as being the last art in finance, because where much of finance is looking at numbers and charts and Excel spreadsheets, M&A is, what's the culture match? Do these people work well together? And traditionally, there's been a lot of meals at steakhouses where people are just kind of sitting around and getting to know each other. Obviously, in today's market, can't do that. We have a colleague that recently had a situation where the buyer and the seller really wanted to spend time together, and the M&A advisor went out and rented a tent and put it in a big open field and put, the buyer and the seller under this tent, 6 feet apart, and they spent several hours talking to each other. We're just going to have to be more creative. Now, truth is, I've been doing this for a lot of decades, so I remember the days when due diligence was inevitably done in an airless room with boxes and boxes of documents in front of you. Well, we now don't do it that way. We do it on, vault rooms or some type of electronic means. So a lot of the stuff that we can do has already been done. It's the final things that make M&A an art that we have to get past, which is how can people get comfortable with each other? Because at the end of the day, M&A only occurs when there's a win-win scenario. And both parties have to trust each other in order to be able to move forward. How do you build trust to a little box that's on a screen? Certainly lots of conversations help, but there is something about actually getting together, and we need to figure out how we're going to be creative about that during the time of the restriction.
Roy, a question for you. If you think, sort of more globally about the impact of COVID-19 on business trends and the dynamics, you had some interesting observations in the prep call for this. Could you talk about that a bit?
Sure. And I love what Sharon said about how unequal the impact is. And the common thread and what she finished talking about was any business, any industry that relies on close human contact is going to have to change. And she's talking about her own business, saying how important close human contact is to making a deal. We obviously, restaurants, cruise ships, entertainment, department stores, all that thing, sports, all that clearly is going to be impacted. But anyway, so the inequality is one thing. Another thing that I've noticed is that this has been an accelerant for if a company is weak, and they're in a category that's affected, this accelerates the weakness. Department stores are a key example. Newspapers, those were weak. Guess what? They have flawed business models. They were already headed toward the exit, but this has accelerated that tremendously. Let's see what else. The outcome of this is going to be a whole lot of concentration as weaker companies fade. Restaurants, for example, a lot of restaurants were marginal businesses at best to begin with. And, they are not going to survive. If you had a marginal business before and you were affected by COVID, you've got to seriously consider your future. And that means that the strong chains, the national chains, the Home Depots, those companies, Walmart, Amazon, that they're going to get larger and larger shares of the customers' dollars as let's face it, Main Street independent retailers suffer even more.
I have to, if I put myself as a private business owner, and I put my heart and my soul and everything my passion into my business, and now now let's talk about the negatively affected folks. I'm going to have an instinct to not let go, right? I'm going to have an instinct to maybe even deny reality. What's your view on that?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. So everybody on this panel is an entrepreneur, and that means that we suffer from a personality disorder of incurable optimism. It's true. And so I am married to what a woman that I call a pessimist, but she says she's a realist, because when they call for a 90% chance of rain, I see that as a 10% chance of sunshine. And I tell her, oh, you're such a pessimist. You think it's going to rain. The number one advice is going to have to be to embrace reality, step back. So one of the things that happens to a business under stress is that your time period, your focus on time, short runs, making the next month's payroll. Then it becomes making the next week's payroll. Then it becomes making the taxes on the payroll two months ago. The time period, you shorten your time period of what you're focusing on getting through. That's no way to run a business. We all know that. And as soon as that happens, you need to step back and really say, listen, was I weak before? Do I have the resources? Do I have a plan to change what we're doing? Is that a plan going to give me a permanent solution? Because this is fine to take PPP money. That's great. It was great. Now it's gone. And that's a Band-Aid. We can't just keep putting Band-Aids on. So my philosophy is, even though it's totally counter to my own personal personality, embrace reality, step back, talk to somebody who's a little more realistic. My wife's available, I think. I'm sure you have somebody in your life who always tries to rain on your parade. And make sure that you have a long-term permanent solution that you're going to pursue, and not just a short-term survival.
You know, speaking of that, Jim, maybe you could jump in here, given your background on restructuring companies and looking at the ops side and the other elements. To avoid Band-Aid, you know, Band-Aids work for a brief period, right? But what sort of, in your experience, things have you run across that helps redesign a business model or an ops model for a company that gives them that future without having to, you know, have difficult conversations with a bank?
Sure, you're right. And when this all first started, I mean, you know, we were in triage mode, everybody. And to the point where I was making, it's like, you know, you better put some bandages and Band-Aids on things for short-term survival. But the reality now is that, and to Roy's point also about being an optimist, it is, you know, this has forced change on businesses across lots of different sectors. And sometimes forced change can actually be a good thing. And we should be looking at, there's obviously the financial impacts on our business, and that was and still is priority number one, because if that's not healthy, nothing else can be. But I would say, like, I'm spending a lot of time with clients where we are, you know, we are putting equal energy into what are the operational changes, what are the cultural changes, what are the personal changes, and where can we seek opportunity? You know, office space is never going to be the same because of work from home. That's a huge financial gain if we get out of some of these big office spaces and of these big leases, right? Embracing work from home is a chance to widen your employee pool. We can now start hiring, you know, we don't need to hire geographically as much. So there's lots of examples, and obviously it depends on the particular business, but where we need to be looking at, okay, longer term, how do we seize opportunity in this current environment?
If I could say something about that, I thought that Roy made a very important point where a lot of what's going on is an acceleration of existing trends. You know, we've been talking about doing video conferences with people, but people still got on planes to go for a 2-hour meeting. And I think that there'll be far more hesitation about not only is it safe to go, but do I need to spend a day and a half traveling to go somewhere for a 2-hour meeting? I think that these were trends that were on their way. Clearly, we all had heard about remote work and more people were telecommuting and all the rest. That raises a lot of benefits, like Jim was talking about. You're no longer confined to a geographic region to hire your people. On the other hand, it really changes management. If your people are in 6 different states and you don't see them other than once or twice a year, how you manage people will be very different. And I would expect that there'll be some companies that will excel in that kind of environment because of the personalities and the character of the company, and others will have a much bigger problem. So this is, I think, and I think Roy said this, it's an acceleration, a vast acceleration of trends that were already underway.
This topic this webinar is entitled "Growth Funding," right, for your business, growth funding. And as listening to this discussion, there seems to be this sort of, cash flow triage funding phenomenon, perhaps, right, which is short term. Can I make payroll? Which is, the solution to that is more Band-Aid effect. But how do business owners make decisions about the types of larger funding to choose, right? Whether it's banks or equity, merging with a competitor for better business performance. And I'm going to throw that one at Roy, but please, I'd like you all to address that.
Yeah. Okay. So that is a gigantic topic. All of the funding sources that were available before this are still there. And but in addition, we've had government funding, but I really see that only as a short-term thing. But what I'm saying is we should be looking for, if your business is at risk or adversely affected, you should be looking at transformational funding, not growth funding, because you need to have that path to changing how you operate, going online if that's what it takes. Not every business is susceptible to being transformed. If it's a business that relies 100% on close human contact, and you can't figure out a way to make that, to do that business without the close human contact, you really need to be looking at options other than just borrowing more money. But that's, what I'm saying is when you go to private equity, when you go to friends and family investors, when you go to banks, when you go wherever you go for funding, it really needs to be, look, I'm going to transform the business. This is what I need to transform the business. And this is the effects that the change that in our profitability that I expect to get out of it. So it's kind of like, not worried about growing, I'm worried about transforming.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. One of the survey questions I recall was about, when we look at those results, again, folks, please, 5 simple questions, if you just complete that would be great. It was alluded to control. Because if you're a self-starter, you're an entrepreneur, you started your own business, you're a family-owned business perhaps, and now you are either for better or for worse seeking external funding, the loss of control would be something I would, be concerned about. What are the realities between, a commercial bank loan versus private equity versus an angel investor from a control perspective?
Well, yeah, the banks don't want to run your business. And ideally, investors shouldn't want to run your business. But in my experience, private equity is, I probably shouldn't say these things. So it's just between us. But private equity is full of people who got lucky once and think they now have the Midas touch and that they know how to run your business better than you do. So if you're taking private equity money, you better be prepared for a major change in how you relate to your business. And Jim can probably comment on that.
Yeah, I'm not going to step in it like you just did, Roy. So I'll try to skirt around it, but I don't disagree with you, right? It's a question of looking at what are the consequences. But you can't give a group. There's no one right answer to the broad question of what's the right kind of funding. It's very, very specific to the business and the situation. But that said, the process by which you decide what's right for me is that process of going through and saying, okay, let's name the consequences. And a loss of control to some business would be devastating, and it probably won't work out right, because sometimes the control is in the right hands because the person has a particular expertise. And other times a loss of control means that an entrepreneur is taking on less personal risk and is spreading the risk around. So it might be the right move. Private equity, yeah, there are certainly lots of really bad stories, and there's also some times where you find a really, really good fit. So it is to the point Roy was making earlier. It's like you need to go in eyes wide open and not just look at the financial implications. It's the first place we go, which is like, okay, well, how much money am I getting? How much did I make? What's and all of that is incredibly important. But understanding what are the changes that are going to happen when we merge with a competitor, that might make all the business sense in the world. But have we done the due diligence on how do our operations fit together? What's the implication on the senior team? And who might walk away, and what's the implication on that? And so there's lots of questions that need to be taken into account. Other than the first question is like, well, do we want to take outside money? And then what kind of money? And then now you start to get into the work of, okay, well, what are all the cultural and personal implications here to the business?
John, if I could add on to that just for a moment, what kind of cash to take, what kind of investment, debt, whatever it might be, is to me the second question. The first question is, what are you trying to achieve? Because what you're trying to achieve should guide you as to what kind of source of capital should you be going for. And what you're trying to achieve, going back to Roy's point, had darn well better be realistic. Because when you start taking other people's money, the oversight on you certainly goes up, whether it's a bank or a PE or anything else. So the first question is, what are you trying to achieve? And then the second question is, how do you get there? I also want to say something potentially controversial, which is PE is not all bad. PE are like people. There are some PE that are almost twirling mustaches. Let me come in, cut your expenses, jack up your revenue, sell you in 3 years, and leave a hulking shell when I'm done. That exists. But there's also PE that are people who, let's say, did extremely well in their own company and are saying, I know something about XYZ industry. I don't want to run a company anymore, but I know enough to be able to invest in that, and I want to do that. So there's family offices. And then there's others, and then more increasingly recently, of PE who's very interested in investing in companies that have 2 million, 3 million, 5 million in EBITDA, where 20 years ago, PE had no interest at all in talking to people at that size range. There's definitely been an emphasis in moving down market for PE, because they're seeing that there's so many opportunities to take a company that was a passion project for the owner, who built it and made it profitable and did terrific things, but might have done it with baling wire and chewing gum. And if you take that company with a loyal client base and employees that care, and you put some more professional management into it, sometimes that alone can increase the value. So, I started, many years ago, and I had the twirling mustache view of PE. And over the years, I've come to realize that there's as many different varieties of PE as there are, sand on the shore. So it really does depend. It's not saying take PE money or not, but that then becomes the third. Who are the people that I'm working with? What are their goals? Forget about what they're saying. What makes sense for what their goals are? And do you believe that? And do those goals coincide? Is there a win-win scenario there, or is it a win-lose scenario?
Right. There are a lot of companies, and I have a lot of clients that meet this description, where they have reached a certain plateau, whether it's 10 or 15 million in revenue. There are different plateaus in a business. And let's face it, the founders were great to get it from 0 to 10 million. But they do not have the skill set to get it past that, to as they say, ad nauseum, take it to the next level. I hate that expression. Anyway, but they have the self-insight to know, look, if I could have scaled this business, I would have. I need help. I need someone else in here. So, yeah, no, there's definitely my hat's off to people that have, again, the self-insight to know, hey, I'm going to need somebody else to help me scale this. And that's what PE does.
Back on the, I'm curious about the acquisition side. So if whether it's related to COVID and 2020 or not, if I'm a small mid-sized business and I have the opportunity to acquire a peer, what am I looking for? Am I obviously is it their vulnerability? Is it their assets? Is it the combination? And Jimmy talked about culture fit and staff and all. But what am I looking for if I'm looking to acquire someone?
Well, I'll take that one. The first question is, why are they trying to sell? Are they selling because they're 72 years old and want to retire? That's one story. Are they selling because their revenues have declined by 40% since February? That's a different story. So why are they on the market? If it's because they're having a problem, why do you think that you can fix that problem? Maybe their margins are actually quite good, but there's a huge amount of debt. Maybe their employee base is not as strong as yours. Maybe they're bringing customers to the table, and that their customer is not as strong a customer base. So simply doing an acquisition could in fact really jumpstart your company. You can move from, let's say, being 15 million in revenue to being 25 million overnight. But that integration is incredibly important. One of the things that I think buyers need to really understand, that the purchase of the company is about 40% of the job. That's finding the company, finding the finance, getting the deal negotiated, closing it. You're 40% of the way there. Where deals fall apart is starting the day after closing. What's the messaging you're giving to your employees? How are you communicating to your customers? How are you going to respect the culture of the company you just acquired while recognizing that you probably have a somewhat different culture? How are you going to merge those two, or is one going to simply be subsumed into the other? So there's a lot of questions that go along with doing an acquisition, and many of those questions are most important the day after you do the acquisition. And the time to be thinking about that is in the time period leading towards the closing, not waiting until, like Robert Redford in the movie The Candidate, well, now what do I do? You should know that before you close the deal.
Yeah, Dennis Roberts says that 80% of acquisitions in this middle market or lower to middle market that we all live in, 80% of acquisitions fail to achieve the expectations of the buyer. That's for two reasons. One, they weren't realistic. They had inflated expectations of what sprinkling their magic fairy dust on the company would result in. And then second, falling down in integration. So totally second Sharon's point about integration. But from the point of view of a seller, I'm okay if the buyer pays an inflated price because they think they think that once they take over, they'll start making tons of profit where I wasn't able to do so.
Is that the salesmanship job right there? Is that, so as you say, if you're the seller, you're okay with the assumptions that the acquirer might be making?
Yes.
But often aren't you a part of your legacy exec staff on the new merged or acquired company, yeah?
Well,
So,
yeah, and that means that your earnout is probably not going to materialize.
right.
But we talked about, first thing I talked about was the personality disorder, the incurable optimism. Guess what? All the sellers have that.
Right.
So they think, oh, well, you're stuck at 10 million. I, in my wisdom, can combine your operation with mine. We're going to lay off all these people. We're going to get synergies, and we're going to start making a ton of profit. And they're optimists too.
Sure.
And that's okay.
A question for Jim, and then folks, I'm going to try to ask you to, if you've not had a chance to get to the poll, please do so. It's 5 quick questions. We're going to close that poll, and this is where I need help from my friends here because I cannot even see you on my phone right now. So Michelle Weatherly, you're still there, yeah?
Yes, she is.
Here,
All right.
and we have a lot of people who have participated in the poll, 14 of the 46, so we do need
All right.
you to look at it, take a look, and please answer. Thank you.
So give another minute or two, then Michelle, I'm going to ask you to close the poll and share the poll. So get familiar with those buttons at the bottom of the screen, all right? So close it and share the poll in about a minute or so. And Jim, let me ask you this. In your experience of the various non-financial challenges of a deal, is there one or two like other behaviors or elements that just always are the weakest point?
Absolutely. I mean, the challenge, and this will echo some of what Sharon was saying, because I definitely am buying what she's preaching, for sure. You know, the entrepreneurs are also visionaries a lot of times. And so you can look at a market and you can say, you know, I see a clear market opportunity here. I see the opportunity, I see a chance to grow, not just organically, but exponentially based on an acquisition, based on being acquired. And all of that is probably very, very true. And they focus on getting that deal closed. And then there is that next morning moment of, okay, now I'm going to turn my attention to, you know, all the operational pieces, making sure the teams are up to speed on what we're doing. And being slightly exaggerative, it's not that, you know, it's not like you sign the deal the next morning, but there is never, in my experience, there's never enough attention paid to, like, okay, what's our cultural plan? What's our operational plan? And a lot of that has to do with what the person who has that vision and sort of sees that deal. The other thing they've had is the luxury of several months of time to get used to the idea of, hey, this is what we're going to do. And if they're not communicating that all along, then you have you've got a great senior team that is culturally super important to you and operationally super important to you. They need time to come along with you. You can't simply just communicate, well, you know, this is what I see, and so we're doing it, and why aren't you as excited as I am? And it's because they need time, they need space, and space to come to those same conclusions themselves, which means, you know, you need to kind of bring them along. So it's how are we communicating this? Who are we communicating it to? And this can get complicated because sometimes when you get in the middle of a deal, there's a lot of confidentiality that has to happen, and so it's very nuanced. And again, very specific to specific businesses and specific cases. But broadly speaking, again, I think it is where an equal amount of attention to all the financial and legal aspects should be paid.
If I could pick up on something that he just said, because I think it's really important what Jim is saying. Confidentiality is extremely important. And you know, almost all of my business owners who are selling, it's one of their highest priorities. Very often, the business owners don't tell anybody on their staff that they're actually going about this deal, and we could be working on it for 6 months, 8 months, etc. Now, I understand, and believe me, I know, no deal is done until the money crosses the wire. But you do need to be thinking about, if you're the owner, if you've had people who've been with you for 5, 10, 20 years, and they are your trusted people, trust has to go both ways. And if you don't tell people until the deal is closed, and I'm not talking about all the employees, I'm talking about the 1, 2, 3 people who are critical to the company being where it is today. If you don't tell them until 24 hours before the deal closes or after it closes, then there's the question of what else is going on that I don't know about. Trust is a two-way street. And you know, you do get to a point in a deal where you know that deal's probably going to go forward. So you need to be thinking about, again, not telling everybody, but the 1 or 2 or 3 handful of people that you really rely upon to bring them into the tent, because they can help you see how other people will respond to this, and you can do a better communication outreach. If I had a company that had 300 employees and it was a husband and wife selling, and nobody knew about the deal except the husband and wife. When they had to lay this out to the 300 people, you know, upon the day of the sale, they couldn't be everywhere. And so the communication was definitely iffier. in a similar situation where, again, it was a husband and wife, and they brought in 3 or 4 people in the last 10 days of the deal. So when it came time to roll out the communications plan, there were 6 different people who could be at different places, taking phone calls, responding to employee concerns, making outreach phone calls to customers. That worked much, much better. You don't need to get them involved at the beginning. You don't even need to get them involved at the letter of intent. But at some point, when you're really believing that this is going to happen, you've got to think hard about who, if anyone, are you going to bring into that circle of trust.
Great, great. Now, I thank you for that, Sharon. I see the poll results, so I'm just going to summarize them, and I'm not certain if everybody can see these results, but I'll just summarize them. The first question was, how has your business been impacted by COVID-19 pandemic and the economic disruption, multiple choice, and revenue loss was the #1 answer by far, twice as much as the customer loss choice. So revenue loss was the biggest impact from the respondents. Second question, are you considering acquiring another company over the next 12 to 15 months? 88% of folks responded no, they are not. So very few, 6% said yes to that question. I'm just going to rattle this off, and then the panelists, if you could, think about things you want to refine as a result of these results. The third question, are you considering selling or merging with another company over that same period, 12 to 15 months? 75% say no, 0% say yes. Curious to me, 19% say I don't know if they're considering selling or merging with another company. Fourth question, what types of funding would you consider? And the #1 answer tied was government loan or other. #2, angel investor, 38%. That's interesting. Bank loan, 31%. And finally, the fifth question, what concerns you most about seeking external funding for your business, multiple choice, and overall debt? 75% of the respondents felt that was the #1 concern they had. And then there's sort of a blend on the bottom. So to the panel, do you have any quick reactions to this? Anything jump out at you?
There's no surprise in these numbers.
Right.
In that when you ask people, are you considering acquiring a company over the next 12 to 15 months? Most people aren't. So maybe 88% is a little bit higher than the norm, but it's usually close to 70%. And, again, I'm assuming that there are not PE people in the audience who, their business is acquiring other companies. And PE at this point is doing between 40 to 60% of all the acquisitions. So acquisitions done by companies tend not to be a very large percentage of the folks doing deals. So that number doesn't surprise me. The 75% of, are you consider selling or merging? I think that there's a misimpression in the market that multiples are down. And if in fact you have a strong company pre-COVID that is a strong company during COVID, there is an extremely active market looking for you right now. So maybe it makes sense that 75% are looking to sell. Usually it's less than 10% looking to sell at any given time. But I think that there are some people who are saying, I wouldn't sell into a down market. But the reality is, it's not a down market.
Right.
Just
And
one of
so,
those complexities. Yeah. Right, please.
yeah, sorry this is just so fascinating because you could drill into any of these. And also, we don't know the industries that are affected. But the fact that 0% of our participants say, I'm not considering selling or merging with it, that to me is unbelievable. You should be. Reason being that if you are constantly thinking about the fact that you might need to sell your business, or you might want to sell your business, or you might have to sell your business, you're going to run your business better. If I thought my house might go on the market in November, I might fix that stuff that's, on the entry door. I got some rotten wood there, then the paint's peeling. So people run their businesses better when they are actively thinking about selling them. So even if it's just a management exercise to adopt that mindset, I would highly encourage it. So I was shocked. Sharon says there's no surprise here. Well, that's because she knows more than I do. But I'm shocked that no one is saying, look, I might have to pull the ripcord sometime in the next 12 months.
And you're saying that, Roy, as a standard operating procedure, you should have your radar on, and it reflects back well into how you manage your business.
Yes, but also that is true all the time, but especially when we are in a time of uncertainty, your mind should be more open to the prospects that you might want to consider all your options. I told my children, follow your dreams, but keep your options open. And I see from this that not everyone is keeping their options open.
Mm-hmm.
I'll go one step further on what Roy is saying, which is the best strategy for running your business is the same strategy if you're planning to sell your business. You know, you're trying to sell your business and you're trying to make it look good. Well, you're trying to make it actually good, which means that you get to own a company that's running well. There's no significant difference between the business plan that you need to run a successful business and the business plan you need to sell that, to prepare your company for sale. So those are not either ors, it's the same direction.
That's, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just jump in real quick because I completely agree. And it's interesting. I'm working with a client who is literally at day one of startup. And so she's just launching her business. And the conversations we're having are about, okay, let's talk about the exit strategy for this business and who's the customer. And I don't mean who is the customer that's coming in and buying your services. I mean, what is the profile of someone that would buy this business in the future, and let's work backwards. And I would say that's an exercise that is incredibly healthy and frankly, probably even more important for someone who's been running their business for 3, 5, 10 years, because you lose sight of it. And again, it doesn't mean you have to go through a transaction. You don't ever have to sell your business.
Right.
But it is to Sharon's point. This is the way to run a healthy business, how to manage a healthy business, which is thinking about what are all the things that would attract an outside acquirer. And I want to, to Roy's point, I want to get my house in order. I want to make sure that we're doing these things the right way. The other thing I think is interesting on that poll results is in question 5. No surprise that debt, when you talk about external funding, debt, obviously. I think I think I just would call out the third one there, the temporary fix and not a structural one, because I think it's so important. If you are taking money and when you get that money, it is a temporary fix and there is nothing else that's going to change. And what you're doing is you are hoping that in 6 months or 12 months, this thing goes away. You've just defined hope as your strategy. And it's not a good one. And we all know it. And so it goes back to some of the things we talked about at the beginning here, which is, sometimes it's a really hard conversation with the person in the mirror of what is the health of my business? What is the situation here? And great that I'm gonna get some temporary money and cover this for 3 months, but it's very realistic that we're in this exact same spot 3 months from now. So what's life look like? And are we focused on making real, true structural change in our business model, and seizing this opportunity because that change is being forced on you?
Here's a question. It just occurs to me that, and it's for everyone. If I assume that I should be in a position to know to sell my company at any moment, let's say, particularly during periods of uncertainty, how do I know what's out there from a potential partner or acquirer of my company? How do I personally don't know that. Well, is there a market that you go to and you find out? If I'm in lawn maintenance business, I simply go to lawn maintenance, corporations. How do I know what's out there? Do I go through a broker? Who has experience with that?
Well, I'll take the obvious question here. I think you hire an M&A advisor, whether you're interested in buying or selling. There are really 3 parts of the market. If you're a big company and you've got 150 million in revenue and you've got, 20 million in EBITDA, whatever it is, there's a zillion people falling all over to work for you. That's great. Let's put those aside. I think that's a very tiny percentage of the world. If you're a Main Street business and you've got, let's say, 2 million, 3 million in revenue or less, then you can probably go to a business broker. And business brokers can be quite good. They can also not be, so it depends upon who you've hired. And they are like real estate agents. They basically get a listing, they put it up on a whole bunch of websites. It's not a simple process, just like being a real estate agent is not a simple process, but it is basically moving the inventory. And then if you are somewhere between, let's say, the 5 million in revenue and 150 in revenue, somewhere in the 2 million in EBITDA and up, then you need to find an M&A advisor. And we're the ones who are really very focused on this part of the market. And this part of the market is extremely important. People who have 10 million to 100 million in revenue are the ones who are creating the jobs. They are often the founder owners who created value out of their imagination. They have a different set of needs than people who have very small companies, and certainly people who have very big companies. So I personally think, and obviously I speak from a level of interest here, that just like when my tooth hurts, I don't tie a string around my tooth and close the door to pull the tooth out. I go to a dentist. I think that these are big transactions and there are complicated transactions. It's not simply finding the buyer. It's negotiating the deal. It's the structure of the deal. Is there going to be assets? Is there going to be equity? Is there going to be a tax election? What kind of earnouts? Are there going to be earnouts? Promissory notes, rollovers of equity, and what kind of documentation will the other party be looking for? These are complex transactions, possibly more complex than they need to be. And I think that having a Sherpa really does help you make sure that you're getting the real value for your company.
Right. So you already know that I think everyone should be thinking of selling their business, even if they're not thinking of selling their business. And I frequently recommend, look, let's get an M&A advisor on our side, have them do an assessment, have them tell us what are the value drivers, how can we maximize the value of this company, where are we weak, what do we need to do to look strong and be strong. And I will frequently do that with a 5-year horizon to say, look, if you want to sell in 5 years, you're telling me you want to sell in 5 years. All right, now's the time to start on this process with an M&A advisor. Frequently, they end up selling faster than that, faster than the timetable they brought in to that meeting. But it's personally, I think it should be, look, whatever business you're in, you will not be in this business forever. You are going to need to exit. So, and you're going to want to exit. So start now, for heaven's sake. It can only improve your business, improve your profitability, short run and long term.
Great. Now we're kind of running toward the end of our time slot. Michelle, I'm going to need your help again. And I cannot see if there were any questions, but if there were any questions, actually now I'm seeing one from Noreen, but it went away. So Michelle, could you read if there's a question or two and we can address that?
Noreen Timoni has made comments, but they are not questions. And they're for all the panelists and the audience. She just talks about defining your goals and objectives first so you understand a realistic expectation so that you can convey the beneficial significance to others to get investment and satisfy oversight requirements. She agreed with Sharon. It's so critical to recognize that operational requirements, whether involved with sale or restructuring or crisis planning, is the big lift. And M&A advisors act on the assessment side, similar to organization development and performance management advisors do in terms of operational review. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great, Noreen, and that ties with what we've been discussing. Well, I think, folks, we're kind of up against the time limit here. I'm going to thank the panel, thank the audience. I apologize for this technological challenge I faced today. This webinar will be posted on the novaeda.org website. if not this evening, by tomorrow morning. And we'll have the presentation that we would have had there along with it. I thank you all very much. And Michelle, it is you who have to actually push the button to end this webinar. And thanks to the panel. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
It was a
everybody.
pleasure.
Appreciate
Take
it.
care. Bye-bye.